I'm not dead. I know, I'm as shocked as you are.
I thought you died.
No.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, Spellmonger, book 16. Preceptor. Yeah, I pretty much feel like I kind of have to do these. Anyway, I have long since stopped talking. Anyway, I have long since stopped saying if I recommend any of these things or not. The fact that I'm on book 16 kind of speaks for itself, I hope. But I do find these kind of videos fun to just, sort of talk about these things and try and spitball all my ideas onto an unsuspecting audience. I have always had a very hard time expressing myself. That's why I started a YouTube channel, so I can force myself to do so. But, onto the book, not my personal life.
Yes, get over it!
If you're watching at the title here and you're wondering, wait, what is a Preceptor? And yes, I know I'm probably mispronouncing that. It is answered very early on in the book. That is the person who basically gets to make the rules. And yeah, that's kind of what the book talks about with this, particularly with regards to warfare, but also in like general society, how Min has to navigate the world by creating the rules of engagement. It's often like said that in warfare you never fight somebody on their own terms. Don't let your enemy control the battlefield, but try to control the battlefield yourself. And that's kind of what happens a lot in this. I'm actually pretty shocked to see that this is fundamentally the end of like the Nemavorti part of this. I mean, not the complete end of it, obviously. They're still going to be kicking around. But that great war between Castelshire and the Nemavorti is done with in this book. And but at the same time, this is not something that feels like, quote, a natural stopping point. It still feels like there's a shitload more of the story to tell, because it's not just defeat the evil Dark Lord, you also have to save the planet somehow.
I just want to tell you both good luck. We're all counting on you.
And also rescue all those people stuck on cryosleep, which I guess you better hurry on that one, otherwise the potassium-50 in your bloodstream is going to cause irreparable damage. But there's more to it than just, a shock assault to finally take out the big bad evil guy. Throughout the book, you get these parts that are the intermissions between the gods, which I have to say, I always enjoy the gods' interactions in this series, because they just seem like a lot of gods. When people are writing gods, they try and make them seem so supernatural and above humanity, but the intention here seems to be making these gods like superhuman in one particularly narrow aspect. As such, they have a lot of very enjoyable personalities, and it's cool to see them bounce off each other in a way without mortal intervention. Even if one of the intermissions kind of looks like an ending slide to Fallout New Vegas.
The light switches continue to bicker and flicker.
This persisted until the day someone dropped a flashlight in the sink, and the two of them united in their hatred of the showboat.
But within that kind of sort of intermission subplot there, a lot of the gods are asking, well, why does a mortal get to make the decisions? And Slagor, the god of games, is just like, well, he's the person who made the rules. It's interesting to see where the gods sort of align on everything in such a way. Basically in a lot of the ways that you would expect them to. The big powerful war god, which shows up here and I don't have a picture of, so I'm just going to use the Giga Chat meme, seems to think that it's really unfair that Min gets to decide if he has permanence or not. And Brigga is obviously on Min's side, which is weird because I think fundamentally in some ways she's the oldest of the gods, but you can read the whole book if you want to see all their dynamics. All I can say is it's kind of a nice change of pace from what we normally see. But anyway, speaking of the gods, with the gods comes divine intervention. And in this book, again, Min finally recreates the Snowstone spell from God, what was it, like book 3? And generally seems to understand how it all ends up working, which is great, unless you're that one guy who got the touch of death, in which case it was less great. But I bring this up mostly as a point of saying that this does really feel like the story is progressing without making it feel like it's somewhat static. That was one of my problems with the last Stormlight Archive book. It kind of felt like Brendan Sanderson was spinning his wheels in this last one. But this is a pretty great example of how you can move things forward while still keeping things interesting. The big bad guy, as we currently know him, is defeated, and a vexing problem from the beginning of the series is solved, but it still feels like there's way more to do, which is one of the reasons I really enthusiastically like this story. It always feels like there's more to learn. As I was actually reading through this, or listening to it as the case applies this time, I remember thinking, God, I really miss Gareth. I really hope he comes back soon. And hey, he came back like a chapter afterwards, dealing with all his tech magey magic stuff in the, I think it was called the Jevelar. Anyway, that whole sequence with Gareth back did make me want to talk about one particular thing, but that one scene where Gareth comes back does make me think of one particular thing I feel like talking about, and that is the decay of cultural knowledge here seems a little bit unrealistic in some ways. You clicked on a video about Spellmonger Book 16, so I'm assuming that you figured out that Calidor is a lost colony of humans in the future. Not a huge shock. And they came there through a cryo ship from actual Earth. Again, you should know that. And as such, we can assume that when they landed there, they landed on Calidor, they had all the knowledge that we had. And we can see at least part of that because the Malkasalon, which I think are just like the gold dwarfs, end up riding through these magical portal on tricycles. Which, well, it is a very funny image when you think about it. That's why the early Warhammer 40,000 setting used it so much, back when it was more of a comedic setting. It does bring up kind of a point about how people could, lose this institutionally useful knowledge. A bicycle or a tricycle are really not all that complicated of things. If you were sent back in time 1,000 years, you probably couldn't make one, but you could probably explain to a blacksmith how to make one. Similarly, there are certain technologies like I couldn't create a refrigerator from scratch, but if I found a coppersmith, I could probably tell them how to do it with burning a wood stove that causes heat to come out, and it's not that complicated. Once you know how something works, it's oftentimes fairly easy to reverse engineer that thing back, and people just don't forget useful knowledge. Even if you just have a conceptual understanding of something, you find an expert, and you can usually find a way to go about that. To that end, there are a lot of things in this setting that are kind of forgotten, but feel like they shouldn't be. Penicillin was mentioned, and I get that they have magic usually to take over most of the medical cures, but it does seem like the type of thing that people wouldn't really forget, even when magic stops coming into things. Even if it's like somebody had a vague recollection from history that oh yeah, we used to use this type of mold to cure this sort of thing. I think it was called penicillin, and then you look a little more deeper into that because it's not like the books went anywhere, and then you find that it does seem like the type of thing that people would vaguely remember and then implement. To that end, something like a bicycle is fundamentally, a bike is like the most efficient way to move you from point A to point B. Humans are very good endurance predators, which just means we don't tire quickly. And because of that, if you put a human on a bicycle, they can probably outrun a horse given the right time frame and distance, because that is an incredibly efficient use of energy, and it seems unlikely that anyone would just give up on that because we've got magic now.
Yeah. Well, whenever you notice something like that, a wizard did it.
Now, to be completely fair to Terry here, all of that is mostly petty nonsense that does not matter. The point of them forgetting these things is not because it's a very likely event to ever happen. Frankly, people are too smart to forget this kind of thing. The point of the people forgetting these things within this story is this is the story that wants to be told here. This is a medieval fantasy setting with medieval fantasy technology, and people running around on bicycles from the very start would somewhat ruin the feeling, even from the beginning. Now you could add that back in because it is starting to expand upon the world into a greater sort of, in a more sci-fi fantasy sense. But when the series was starting, I can see why you would want to avoid these things, because there are other considerations when writing a story other than if this makes perfect sense or not. So I'm more or less cool with this kind of techno-regression, even though I don't think it's a very likely thing to ever happen. Yes, there were instances in the past, like Roman concrete, for example, that where people lost the ability to understand how to make these sorts of things, but it's always worth noting that these were very specific to what was being lost. A lot of the time, when we talk about like the fall of Rome and what that actually meant, it had more to do with like a loss in technology, in commerce, in interconnectivity, because society fell back to being more insular and feudal. And as such, it makes a lot of sense that like the technology that was actually lost during the Roman periods were things like grand infrastructure projects that ultimately small rural communities, which is what people ended up going more into being, didn't need. My overall point here being that people remember useful technology. The only time people forget about how a technology is actually made, like Roman concrete, is when it's no longer useful. Yeah, that was basically my experiences with the book Preceptor, and I still think I'm pronouncing that wrong.
And they're carrying treasures from the pyramid.
Before the treasures are smuggled out of the country.
The stolen treasures.